all right. Let's go ahead and get started here. Let's see if we can get this recording going. All right. About 15 seconds to roll here. 15 seconds to roll. We're here in the group. Nice sunny day here on the pen. We've got 10 seconds till we roll. I'll jump down into the pen right next to our riders here. Make sure we've got everybody organized, and then we'll get started with our in the feed zone chat today. Here we go. All right, looks like we're on to a great start here. Get all those riders out. We'll also get this shared out to our groups, and then we'll go straight from there. I like it. This group post Thanksgiving here in America. It looks like this group's getting nice and grouped up together. I like that. I like that. I like that. Okay, looks good. Let's go ahead and jump into our first slide. All right, first I want to start off with saying good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all those listeners out there. We are on the live platform here on Zwift.com. If you haven't checked this platform out, definitely check this out. We're actually on our bikes riding, and the power you see there on the bottom right is the power that these riders are putting out, as well as the riders you see around are actual real riders on the course. I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Jason Flores. I go by JFlow here on the course, so if you have a chance, definitely check it out. If you see me on the course, go ahead and give me a ride on. I'll give you a ride on back. If you're interested in listening to this live, or if you miss the live recording, you can go back to listen to the live recording, or you could actually head to your favorite podcast app, which you can look up the Endurance Lab and find any of our live broadcasts here from Zwift Live by ODZ, like What's Up with Power with Justin Wagner, or Chat and Chill with Taya Friestead, as well as Coach's Corner, which features the coaches, excuse me, of the Endurance Lab, chatting about the week in the Endurance Lab and the different types of training that they're doing. So we are on the eve of, I guess would be post-Thanksgiving, but the eve of the Team Worlds race here on Zwift. And if you're not familiar with that race, it's where all the I guess the teams, you would say the trade teams here on Zwift, get together, put teams against each other, up to 6 riders per team, and they'll be duking it out tomorrow on some long format courses that you'll find here on Zwift. I think the longest race being something to the tune of 70 plus odd miles for some of the categories. So definitely an exciting race. If you have a chance to jump on and check out, definitely check that race out. So just before we get going here, a quick medical disclaimer is that this is the only purpose of this live stream is to educate and to inform, and it's not a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional, and that it's provided on the understanding that it does not constitute medical or professional advice or services. All right. Some of the goals of today's live stream will be to present current articles in the media, covering food, hydration, and how it relates to sports, and just really to open up a dialogue for viewers to ask questions, to get advice, and to talk about their experiences, you know, with these sort of issues, I say. Let's talk a little bit about our topic today. We can kind of introduce this. So we're talking about different ways of staying hydrated on the bike. And so the different ways we can do this are, or if you can categorize the different ways that we could do this, we could do it by drinking to thirst, doing what's called prescribed drinking, the idea of a little bit of dehydration being fine, going back also drinking to maximum tolerance. Those would be the 3 actually. We'll start with those, and then we'll deep into a talk about, we'll dig into a talk about how a little bit of dehydration could be fine. Talking about a little bit conflicting research, and then we'll try to pull it all together and develop some practical guidelines of what we could use both here on the indoor trainer on the bike, as well as out on the real road out there on our adventures. So let's dive into that. What's this? close this. All right, so the first topic or the first idea is drinking to maximum tolerance. And so with this, early hydration guidelines are focused on minimizing fluid loss and by drinking really as much as possible. So this can actually be pretty tough. And so this is the idea of drinking before you're thirsty, drinking as much as you can throughout a day. Those sort of things are where this comes into play, or at least where this idea comes from. Trying to stay ahead of it so that you have as much fluid on as you can. So the problems that can happen, or I guess where this idea comes from, it comes from the idea that any level of dehydration, even up to as small as 2%, can cause a greater loss of total body mass, and your anaerobic performance actually declines. So that's something that we need to be careful of. And so as we look at that, you'd want to say, hey, I don't want to lose any hydration. I don't want to get dehydrated. And so at this point, I want to make sure I put as much as you can in. The problem comes from when you're trying to put that much amount of hydration in, and depending on what the composition is, you may find that you end up taking on too much of either, whether it be salt or whether it be water. You may find that it is an increasing amount where you can get bloated, you'll have extra weight, and you could actually not be able to absorb those fluids. So very, very important in that sense. So essentially, the more you drink, the less fluid you end up losing. So staying hydrated. So essentially, supposedly, because you are not going down past that 2% of dehydration level, your performance will be better. The problem is it can lead to what's called hyponatremia. You may have heard this term before, and essentially what it is you're having too much water, plain water, or just water solute coming into the body, and there's not enough salt coming in. This is a condition that you hear and see in the marathon world, or even in the longer distance biking world, just because riders are not taking in enough mix of whether it be a carbohydrate solution, an electrolyte solution, something other than just water, just constantly. So as the advent of sports drinks and electrolyte drinks becomes more and more prevalent, you find that riders and runners are taking more of those in, and we're having less of an issue. But the problem is they're just taking in so much. And so that's the thing that we need to watch out for. All right, so the second idea would be to drink to thirst. So more recent guidelines have emphasized that individuals like sweat composition and the rate and the electrolyte concentration that's coming out of your body will dictate how much you should drink. So you don't drink when you drink when you're thirsty, and if you're not, you're not, and your body should be able to tell us or tell you what it needs at that point. And so definitely something, if you're not, you're not, and your body, so definitely something very useful in that sense. As far as making sure you have a good gauge of that, it's something that you have to practice, something that you have to, get a chance, whether it be here on Zwift, on a trainer, or out on your rides. You need to, at different intensities, to know how quickly you'll be able to do those sort of things. So drink to thirst can still result in some dehydration, just because the amount that you're putting in may not be to the level to not get you below that 2%. So it would be a change in the body weight of the tune of 1 to 3%. So with that change, you are still risking essentially the amount that could cause a decrease in aerobic performance. So even though it is shown as little as 1%, your thirst might still slow you down. So this is a consideration. But then the question becomes, is that actually important in a competition? All right, so the next idea would be prescribed drinking. And then so essentially prescribed drinking is you take an idea of how much you're losing over time, and you bring that to the table, and you're able to kind of figure out exactly how much you should be putting in. What you want to do, or as it aims to do, is it minimizes fluid loss. So that way you're not drinking too much and you're not finding yourself drinking too little, and you're trying to find that little middle ground. All right, just getting a couple messages out to our riders here on course. So essentially the way you would do this is you would weigh yourself before and after a trial ride, and you'd get an idea of how much you weigh. And so you would systematically dose evenly throughout a race to make sure you want to aim for your weight loss being under 0.5%. So the way the math goes for all of this is that you want to decrease the amount of percent weight loss by the end of a ride, and that is what's going to tell you how much you are losing or gaining throughout that ride as far as your sweat rates, at least a gauge. There are some other ways. We have done a couple articles by Precision Hydration that has a test that you can take that will allow you to get a better idea of your sweat rate, and you can actually dial in your amount of electrolyte intake, amount of intake that allows you to make sure that you don't get this weight loss. All right, so essentially going back to what's the goal of all this, prescribed drinking. It's minimizing fluid loss through the prescribed drinking, which sounds great, but essentially for a lot of scenarios, it may be impractical. Essentially in the competitive scene, what that does is you're essentially trying to keep up pace, you're trying to make breaks, and then what happens is that you end up getting behind because maybe you missed the alarm on your Garmin, or you're not getting enough in, and you can find yourself behind very quickly. All right. So then the idea is that dehydration might be okay. So in all these situations, if things don't go perfect, if things don't go well, you'll find yourself essentially dehydrated, right? Because you may get behind, you may not be drinking enough on drinking to thirst, and you end up losing weight or getting dehydrated. So what we can do is at least look into some of the science and some of the results. And essentially what they found is that fastest runners in a lot of the races, essentially the top tier riders or even racers in the running race, were actually dehydrated at the finish. And the ones who were the fastest were actually dehydrated the most. Most runners in this study were losing over or around 3% of their body weight. So if the best runners were mostly dehydrated, then what does that say to our endeavors is trying to get ourselves to that level to perform? So are they giving up that performance, that aerobic performance, in order to just do what they need to do, and is it in fact affecting their performances in those races? So let's look into that. So essentially there is a little bit of conflicting research here, and I'll bring that up now. And it essentially, the effect of dehydration might be inflated from the original studies that has driven the idea of hydration or overhydration, because it was a laboratory-based research. So the explanation of the disconnection between hydration research down to the placebo effect of how a rider or a runner feels could be the reason why we have everything we have today. And a lot of times research like this is the direction things go, whether it be in nutrition, hydration, fueling, feeding, all the things that we have. And one of the reasons why we try to talk about this is to kind of open riders' eyes to the different ways of thinking about how we do things. A lot of times it's driven by the commercials that we see or the things that we hear and read, but I think better would be to make sure that we have the information that we need to make this decision. So for today, it's that there's different ways to hydrate, and that you need to pick what's most pertaining, or what can work for us, for you, and what can get you to feel good. Is drinking bottle after bottle after bottle what works for you? I think that's great. I think you need to look into if, in fact, are you needing to, take those breaks off the bike more? Are you needing to, afterwards you're not feeling you're feeling more sluggish? I think if you take the 3 ways that we talked about today, kind of split those up, and allow yourself to try each one to see what works for you, you can just at least get more information and make a decision for yourself. So whether it's we'll bring this up together here to you guys. So let's continue on with a little bit more research that we can bring to the table. So in 2015, the study used essentially intravenous infusion to blind participants of their hydration status. So a bunch of riders, they didn't know what level of hydration they were at. They were injected as intravenous infusion. So they went with ones that were a hydrating solution or one that was not a hydrating solution. And there was no performance difference between this between the cyclists that were trained and that were compared to. So unknowingly, people were hydrated around 0.5% body loss over this trial, and those others that were dehydrated around 3.2 body percent weight loss, and there was no difference in between those two groups. So hydration in this study, most recent study in 2015, didn't seem to matter in the performance in the end. So let's put it all together here. I'll bring up a full chart. And what we're looking at is a couple different hydration strategies. And so this is a good way to kind of put the whole thing in picture, and we'll put some pros and cons and we'll go over it all. And so what we're looking at is on the far left here, drinking to tolerance. So what we want to do in this respect is to minimize fluid loss, and the drawbacks being potentially decreasing your cardiovascular strain or your aerobic capacity or power. The cons are drinking too much water will essentially could be a danger of hyponatremia. There's also could be a fixation with constantly trying to drink because it ends up being a lot, making sure, grabbing the bottle, taking a drink. The second being here in the middle, towards the middle, is drinking to thirst. It does minimize the risk of hyponatremia. It is a more customized way to individual sweat rates, because we are leaning on our bodies to kind of tell us, which always is a good thing to kind of get a feel for what your body is telling you need. And then this often results in dehydration though. So because you can easily get behind, if your mind is somewhere else, or if you're in a difficult position where you're trying to move up in a group or on a difficult climb and it just is out of your mind and there's something on top of that. So it may be dangerous in hot or difficult to drink environments, whether it be a race environment or something like that. The other idea would be prescribed drinking, a little to the right here. It does minimize fluid loss with lower risk or hyponatremia. It potentially decreases your cardiovascular strain and it lowers your thirst. If your race or you have the availability to have the amount of water that you need, for example, here on Zwift, you can have the bottles that you need close by. You're not going to fall off the bike unless you're on rollers, I guess. But you'll have that ability. It's something that you can try. Measuring yourself before and after, giving yourself an idea of how much water loss you have and how much water you need in the body could be very, very practical in that sense. But outdoors, in a race scenario, it may be very, very difficult. So essentially, the last idea here is that dehydration may be fine. That we can leave it to concentrating on riding and not have to concentrate on drinking, making sure you're getting a good range of amount in. A lot of times when people ask recommendations, I'll easily give anywhere from about 1 bottle an hour, whether it be the smaller or the taller. That's between 20 or 24 ounces an hour, and that usually falls in where people drink to thirst around a bottle an hour. But in a lot of racing applications, just getting the water in when you can could be very, very useful and not putting so much stress on that. So this definitely does have more real world applications. Even the fastest riders that we're finding are ending up being pretty dehydrated at the end, but are able to perform at that higher level. So what does it say to what us as amateurs or enthusiasts is that we can probably adapt some of these pretty safely. As long as we are thoughtful. One of the considerations may be in a hot environment, but hopefully our bodies are telling us, hey, we need more hydration, we need more water in those situations. In that case, it should help. Essentially, the idea of some dehydration is fine is a complete departure from a lot of the established hydration research, and it's something that we can take into consideration. So between these two, I feel that the group of coaches that I work with at the Endurance Lab, as well as Nate Dunn here from Data Driven Athlete. If you get a chance to check out his website, definitely check out his website. Between drink to thirst and understanding that dehydration is fine during our rides could be a real eye-opener for a lot of us. Just making sure you're getting the hydration in on those rides, those races here that we do virtually, or those coffee rides, getting an idea of what if I didn't drink as much? What if I just drank when I kind of felt like it? How does that make me feel? Do I drink? Do I need more? Do I need less? And kind of work from there and go by feel and try to get a feel. Just like anything else, you want to get a feel for how your body's doing and how different efforts affect that. So essentially, as we develop practical guidelines for what we should do, even before we get on the bike, even before we start training, you want to make sure that you start your race or training session fully hydrated. Starting fully hydrated in the hours before and not the minutes before your race could be a make or break. So the things that you do before your race, the day before, the hours before. So for example, those riders that are riding the World's Race tomorrow should be hydrating all throughout today in order to get ready for tomorrow's 2 to 3 hour race that we'll all be enduring. And not trying to put it all in, the 30 minutes that we go right before the race starts. So for those high intensity races under an hour, really, you don't need to really need to worry much about it. In the same consideration, when we talk about how much fuel or how much food we need to get in for those same 1 hour, 45 minutes to 1 hour rides, really there's not much hydration. It's really just to wet the palate, but not much in that's getting in to get absorbed and making a real difference here. So keeping that in mind, anything over an hour, you're really going to need to making sure, thinking ahead, and you're getting the fuel in that we're talking about, anything over 90 minutes, as well as the bottle in, 1 bottle in an hour, paying attention to your thirst. So for most race scenarios, when the going gets tough and you're trying to make a move and you're, throwing elbows and, grabbing wheels, you're gonna end up essentially drinking to thirst. And you're gonna drink when you can, and drink when you're thirsty, and then drink when you're not. So, but keeping in mind that for hot and longer races that are going to be over than 2 hours, you need to make sense to follow some type of modified approach of prescribed drinking. So essentially, this is what I keep bringing up about around 20 to 24 ounces, about a bottle an hour, can get you where you need to be, where you're in some middle ground, and that's where the science is going to. When I refer to science, the newer science or the newer information that I'm getting this from is a gentleman called Timothy Noakes, and if you have a chance to look him up, it's definitely an eye-opening read. There's a book he put out, I would say, about a year and a half ago, called Waterlogged. I'll put a link to the Amazon store, but in the Amazon, an Amazon link in the talk here. I think it could be very, very interesting read for those who want to hear and know more about this. So essentially, as we talk about this, you could stress you out, try to figure out how much do I need to drink, how little, do I need to listen to myself, do I listen to the body, what do I need to do? So essentially the bottom line ends up being, don't worry about it. As long as when you start your ride, you're well hydrated, you've gotten the things in that we've talked about, the good mix between salt and water, and we've talked about a percentage of carbohydrate solution that could really help with hydration. And then you drink when you're thirsty, you're going to be fine. That when you get off the bike, you're going to lose a few percentage of body weight points, and you still would have been able to perform at your highest level. So I think that that's totally okay. So a couple references here from our author, who's Nate Dunn from Data Driven Athlete. If you have a chance, check his articles out. He's got some great blogs, some great information. He's also a contributor to What's Up with Power on Wednesdays with Justin Wagner, so definitely check that out. But just on the eve here of Team Worlds, for those riders who will be riding tomorrow, and for the future of those riders who are interested in learning more about this, check out the book by Timothy Noakes for the most current research. Check out more blog posts here, Data Driven Athlete, as well as Precision Hydration, which is a great new group out of the UK that has done some great strides in getting a better feel for our sweat rates and gets you a better idea to how much salt versus water you need to put in. And when we talk about hydration, and that's a whole nother talk, it's something that you could essentially dial in to make sure every bottle that you put in and every bottle that you drink is exactly what you need in your bottle. So with that, we're winding down here on the course here. I can take any questions. I don't know how many riders are actually on our Facebook feeds here in the U.S. There's not a whole lot of people here on course. This looks like a lot of other riders on course. But if there's any questions here on Facebook, I'm more than happy to take any, or any of your experiences with any of this. All right, seeing none, looks like this group did a really good job at staying together. I want to thank everybody who logged on today, who watched the live stream. And don't forget, if you missed the live stream, you have a chance to watch the replay on Facebook Live. You also have an opportunity to listen to this on the go. Just go to your favorite podcast app, search for The Endurance Lab, and you'll be able to check all our shows, What's Up with Power, Chat and Chill, Coach's Corner, and here in the feed zone. Every week we get it ported over to the podcast, so definitely enjoy that. So without any questions here, I'd like to thank for everyone joining in, and from here in the feed zone, I'll see everyone next week. Have a great weekend, and for those racing tomorrow, have a great race.